Oh boy, is it that time already? Yes, it's time for more Stellaris videos because Synthetic Dawn has dropped, and with it, an accompanying free patch loaded with a whole bunch of new content. But is it worth your time to buy the new little expansion, or should you just stick for that free update until you get some sales going on and then pick up Synthetic Dawn? It's time to delve once more into the state of Stellaris. So what exactly do we have on offer here? Well, the main meat of this particular expansion is of course Synthetic Empires. You can now choose to play as machine races straight off the bat, and in sticking with that theme we see additional machine empires spawning throughout the galaxy, a new machine-based endgame crisis, and machine fallen empires. But on top of that there has been a bunch of additional tweaks. Of course, the overhauls to the way that traditions work to make them more unique and fitting for any particular type of ethics that you might happen to choose, as well as various other minor tweaks throughout the game. And we'll talk about those, I think, first before we get into the meat of things. So what's here for our organic populations? Not a lot. They're not really the focus of this particular expansion, and it shows. Now, what we do have are things like changes, which have made certain civics and other such things more restrictive in how you can apply them. For example, you might not be able to get a specific civic that you used to be able to use on any old civilization. It is now restricted only to pacifists or only to militarists, and players, a lot of them, do not like this. I, on the other hand, do. I think it's a step in the right direction, but one that doesn't quite go far enough, because for the longest time we have had a problem in differentiating our empires from one another. They ultimately all felt kinda the same, which was a problem when it came to replayability. Your spiritualists feel a lot like isolationists, who feel a lot like militarists. The gameplay was ultimately exactly the same. But now we do have some changes. Inward Perfection, for example, has been tweaked to no longer simply give you a happiness bonus, but to also remove your ability to engage in outside diplomacy while you have that civic, which is great if you want to play an isolationist style. You may be thinking to yourself, but wait, we already had an option like this in the form of things like Fanatic Purifiers. They didn't have the ability to engage in any type of diplomacy at all. And while that is true, this one is more of a positive one. Because you don't have the massive negative opinion bonus from other empires, you can pursue a more peaceful, at your own pace gameplay style in an isolationist form without having to worry about everyone invading you because you're seen as a threat to the galaxy. The other big change is, of course, the tradition tree. And this was one which I was very disappointed in when it was first introduced alongside Utopia, mostly because it was exactly the same for every single race, regardless of their theming. And I felt that this was a wasted opportunity to distinguish each potential species from one another, while also having a way to make each one play differently from one another. However, again, steps in the right direction with the changes that have been made alongside Synthetic Dawn. Unfortunately, they haven't gone as far as I would have liked to have seen, but again, steps in the right direction. There are now different traditions available depending on your ethics. I'm playing, for example, xenophobic isolationists. That means that I am both a pacifistic race and a xenophobic race. So instead of getting domination, one which would require me to go out and conquer other races, I get purity instead, which is a nice change and has certain distinct traditions within it. I also get adaptability rather than diplomacy, since I am a race that cannot engage in outward diplomacy. These are nice changes. What is, however, unfortunate is the fact that a lot of these changes are purely cosmetic. In many cases, the traditions are exactly the same as they were before, but they have flavor text or new names, and that's it. you're getting the same effect, but we've changed that wording so that it's no longer referring to your materialist race. It's some sort of spiritual reason that you got a plus 5% happiness bonus. It's different, you see? And that is incredibly disappointing for the most part. There are some distinct and unique features on the traditions trees that you can only get via those specific civics, and some of these are really great. They're excellent. Others are terrible in the fact that they seem to have been, well, we'll remove a tech from the tech tree and stick it into the traditions tree. The symbol of purity, a unique bonus building that you used to be able to research if you were a xenophobe, is now in the purity section of the tree, which means that you've just taken the tech which made them distinct and moved it into the traditions tree, which makes them distinct, which is ultimately a zero-sum addition to what makes xenophobes different to play. So yeah, like I said, steps in the right direction, but not really going the extra mile. The only other noteworthy change here is one that I didn't notice in playing, so I'm not sure exactly what they've done, but that was in the system with factions. Namely, they've tried to make changes to make factions feel more distinct and unique from one another. However, all of my factions looked exactly the same as they always have. Playing several organic races to try and see what the big difference was, there doesn't seem to be one. The Prosperity Party is the same as they've always been. All the other parties are the same. I'm not sure if maybe I simply misread something somewhere, that this change was coming, and therefore it was never actually added, and that's why I don't see anything. The other thing that I would like to point out is the fact that they said that there would be changes to make it more clear when a particular faction or party is pleased with certain results, so that it is less confusing about what's going on with those factions. For example, there is, with the materialist factions, they want to have a lot of robots, and so they get upset if there aren't robots and you need to build a certain number of populations. And one of the problems here was the fact that you had those three colours alongside the happiness rating for fulfilling each of the requirements of a political party, and they could be green, yellow or red. And the problem was that it would seem like, okay, they're unhappy, if I fulfill this need it will make them happy, but instead it would make them neutral, which would make you think, do they go neutral when they're unhappy about this particular issue, or do they go red? It was sort of confusing, and nothing has really been done to fix this. It would be ideal to get rid of that neutral position entirely and just have red for unfulfilled and green for fulfilled, to make it absolutely clear that yes, you are fulfilling this, and having it fulfilled doesn't actually do anything, it just makes them not unhappy rather than making them happy. It would be much clearer, much cleaner on the UI, especially when you've got a situation where sometimes they can go from red to yellow, and that is the entire scope of that particular point of contention, or they could have green and yellow be the point of contention, so it's happy to neutral or unhappy to neutral, and nowhere else on that spectrum. It can be something of a mess. It would have been nice to see that cleaned up. I remember reading somewhere that they were going to do it. It doesn't seem to have happened, or some other changes have been made and I'm not seeing it. Yes, that's right, there has been a weapons rebalance, and it was one which was desperately needed. Missiles have been, for a long time, absolutely terrible, and Paradox is aware of this. They have taken steps to try and make missiles a lot more useful, and in doing so they have demonstrated one thing perfectly clearly, and that is that they have no idea why missiles suck so hard. Because what they have done is they have fixed a problem which, while yes it was a problem, it wasn't the problem. Missiles will now retarget in the event that the ship they were aiming at is destroyed. Previously what would happen is you fire 20 missiles at one ship, that ship blows up, and then those 20 missiles disappear because that ship's not there anymore. They've got no target to head for, and it takes them such a large travel time that was an absolute waste and made missiles feel terrible when used in a large fire combat situation. Now, they of course are able to retarget instead of simply going, well, my job's done, no more ships, oh wait, there are hundreds of them. That doesn't happen anymore. What, however, they have failed to do is stress the fact that missiles still have a hard counter in the form of point defense, and it still works just great. Like, those missiles aren't even going to get a chance to retarget because they'll get blown up long before they do. Missiles still suck, and they need to address that fact by either giving them a bonus to make them more attractive, like splash damage, allowing them to take out large clusters of ships rather than anything else, or weaken point defense so that it is not such a hard counter against them. Unfortunately, missiles still stink. You've really only still got those two options: kinetics and energy weapons. Yes, it's time to talk about the meat of this thing: machine races. And they are awesome and also slightly disappointing in some ways. You see, your machine races are hive minds, or rather gestalt entities. The hive-minded trait has now been changed to be gestalt entity so that it can now apply to networked AIs as well. In this case, you are a single AI who controls numerous autonomous drones. You play in a way which is very similar to hive minds. Namely, there's no happiness bonus, which is unsurprising. You're a robot. There are no internal factions or anything like that. Unlike the hive minds, which were the organic populations without a lot of features, however, the machine races have enough to distinguish them so that this does not feel like you're just playing an easy version of an organic population. Instead, the robots thankfully have enough that distinguishes them from the other races to make it feel like you're playing something unique and distinct, which is lovely. However, if you were hoping to play as militarists or xenophiles or pacifistic robots, unfortunately this is not an option, and Paradox has said that this is because they don't want to devalue the synthetic ascension pathway, and you can kind of understand why that would be the case, because if you want to play as a race of individual machines, then you kind of have to go with the synthetic pathway. If they did it otherwise, why would you ever use synthetic pathways again? You would just choose to play as them from the start, and you might as well not have the synthetic pathway at all. However, it is somewhat disappointing, yes. Now let's talk about customizing our robots. Visually, not a lot here. There's about 8 portraits, and they are of a type which basically mirrors the various types of organic races. You've got avian robots, you've got anthropoid robots, you've got humanoid robots, etc., etc. 8 different types of robotic portraits. It's not a lot, but it does do the job. You also got no robotic city for you to customize your cities with, which is somewhat disappointing, and no robotic ship classes. Now, you may have noticed throughout this video so far that there have been a number of robotic ships and whatnot flying about in the video. These are AI Rebellion ships and Contingency Endgame Crisis ships. They are not available for you to choose to play with as yourself, which is a shame. The fact that these ships, however, also already existed in-game. Yes, there's only 2 particular ship classes, it's not a full set, but Paradox could have gone the extra mile, added those 2 additional ship classes that we had Corvette versions, for example, and then allowed them to be recolored so that we could have our own distinct robotic ship types, but unfortunately they're not there. Customization visually is just okay in a lot of cases. Your ship's very disappointing. When it comes to customizing your robots with their traits, this at the starting point is somewhat less important, but also can be gamed a little bit. Your leaders are immortal and will always have the starting traits that you pick up. So you can sort of manipulate things by, for example, picking emotional emulators with the plan of simply dumping this particular trait the instant you get the opportunity, because it doesn't really add anything other than an opinion bonus to other races. However, your leader will always have Emotional Emulator as a trait, which will give you a permanent opinion bonus to all the other races, will allow you to ditch it later and get the full maxed bonus. So in this case, it is unimportant to pick your trait specifically, because you will be modding your robots in order to optimize them for each specific role within the Empire, while also allowing you to pick them being reasonably important in that your leaders will always have that particular set of traits, and thus you can totally manipulate things slightly on that level. So, but the main meat of customization is going to come in the form of your civics. There are 3 unique robot civics, and they range from great to okay. They are the servitors, the assimilators, and the exterminators. Let's start with the most disappointing one, the exterminators. These are fanatic purifiers. That's it. They've got all the bonuses that fanatic purifiers get, but they're robots this time instead of something else. They suffer the same massive penalties to diplomatic ties as fanatic purifiers, etc., etc. The only difference with them is that because they're on a rampage against organic life, they can actually engage in diplomacy with other machine races, which is pretty cool. However, in most games that I have played where I have not stacked the deck by force spawning certain empire types within a galaxy, I will often find that I only end up with 1 or 2 other machine races. They tend to be very small and on the opposite side of the galaxy. They're not common enough for it to be the case where you get a lot of them, so it feels like the fact that you can engage with them diplomatically is something of a meh feature. However, the other thing worth mentioning here is the fact that diplomacy has been changed slightly, it seems at least, in order to make making alliances and forming federations much harder, which means that, again, underwhelming in the fact that you've allowed them to have some diplomacy by making that diplomacy a lot harder to achieve. So, again, The second civic is good. It's the assimilators. They're basically the Borg. They take other races and they assimilate them into the machine consciousness. This is an automatic process. It is not something that you have to do, and you can't really gene mod or otherwise modify the populations as they enter into the machine consciousness. It would have been nice if we could have specialized these drones when we conquer a planet, because come on, that would be cool. Unfortunately, you can't. What else do you get? Well, you get a negative penalty to other races because they don't like you. You're going to assimilate them, and rather than destroying them, you simply assimilate them. Other than that, you're pretty much a fanatic purifier. You're a fanatic purifier that assimilates people instead of killing them. So, okay, great. It doesn't, unfortunately, offer a lot of distinct gameplay options. You can't, like I said, modify your cybernetic pops. You can't reproduce or use them beyond the fact that they exist when you conquer a planet. It's somewhat like, you could have done so much with this particular type of gameplay style, and in the end you went with the most lackluster and boring version of it. I conquer a planet and then eventually I get rid of all the unrest because over a period of time they all automatically become machines, stop reproducing, and yeah. Now the last civic are the servitors. These are basically machines who have been developed to take care of organics, and as the organics have become more pampered and lazy, the machines have taken over their civilization to an extent where it's now basically the machine civilization instead. And these guys get bonuses based on how many organic populations that they are taking care of. And so there's this interesting mechanic where you need to balance the number of organics in your empire that you are caring for in order to maximize the additional production output on your other populations, but also you don't want to have too many organics because they're not really doing anything. They're just, providing bonuses to your other workers. It's a nice balancing act, which makes this particular civic play differently from the other ones. Thankfully, that is not the limit, however, of what makes the robots distinct, and what makes them distinct also, thankfully, has some gameplay impact. For example, it changes your economy when you have to build your machine populations instead of having them simply grow. There's also the fact that you maintain them with energy, including your cyborgs. There is no need for food throughout your machine empire unless you happen to be playing as servitors. And this changes the way that your economy is structured. It also changes the way that you colonize and build up your colonies. For example, when you arrive on a colony, you need to start building buildings, but you also need to start building populations. And robots build, unfortunately, terribly slowly. It is really atrocious. Some people are going to say, oh, it's fine because organic populations and the way that they work. Well, the problem is organic populations have various modifiers which can help speed up their population growth, and you're not constantly needing to micromanage them. But robot pops do have some advantages to counterbalance this. They've got a consistent build rate regardless of how populated a planet is. It always takes 30 months for a new robot pop to be built. Unfortunately, you can't build more than one at a time, which is a shame for your mass produced robots. It will always take 30 months, so depending on how big a planet is, it can take a long time to get it populated, especially without any real modifiers to population build speed. Now, there are ways around this, provided that you've got an established empire. Let's say you've got 5 planets and they are full. You also now have a new planet which you're colonizing, your 6th. What you do is you take the robots on one robot pop from each of your 5 planets, you move it to the new planet. Then you start building a new robot pop on each of those planets. Those allow you to build 5 robot pops simultaneously, which can then be moved again to the new planet, speeding up its colonization process. This, however, takes a lot of micromanagement and gets really annoying reasonably quickly. So it would be nicer if there were ways of managing your population growth with your robots in a way that made them distinct from other races, but also less of a pain in the ass. What I would suggest, therefore, would be, instead of having a reassembled colony ship land on your planet, it's not called that, but it's basically the exact same thing. When your colony ship lands on a planet, it turns into an automated fabricator, and this would allow you to build robots really fast. But you cannot build buildings on the planet until that fabricator is disassembled and turned into a government building. So you've got a choice. What do I keep this automatic fabricator going until I've got all my pops set up and established? They're not really producing a lot while they're doing that. Or do I want to switch over to a government building? And so you've got the choice of doing it straight away, and therefore having slower population growth, letting it run all the way through so that you can get those pops established really quickly, but you can't build any buildings so they're not being very productive, or sort of a half and half where it's like, look, I'm going to establish a good base number of populations, then convert it into a government building, and then from there proceed on. I think that would have been a much more elegant solution. It gives you more options in how you play. Each colony is going to feel more engaging as you colonize them, and it wouldn't be quite as much of a pain in the ass as the current system is. But of course, that is not the limit of what makes these play differently from other races. What does that is robo-modding, which is so great. What it basically does is it allows you to create specialist types of robots that you can then build. So you're no longer restricted by having one race with one set of traits. Instead, you can go, well, my scientific research is going to be handled by logic engines who are going to have increased society, physics, and engineering output. And then I will also create mining drones who are going to have increased mineral production when they work, and I'm going to make sure that mineral drones only work in mines, and I'm going to make sure that I've only got my logic engines in science buildings, etc., etc. This is great. It allows you to create a number of unique templates, and as your society advances, you get access to more traits, the ability to stick more positive traits onto your robots, it's overall the most powerful tool that you have as a machine empire, and it's what really helps make them feel distinct and different from other races. Of course, there are a number of problems that come along with this, and that mainly comes in the form of sectors. Now, because maintenance for machines is taken directly from the Empire's total energy pool rather than from sector pools, this means that the sectors cannot build their own robots, which means that you need to micromanage those planets when they're sectored, which is not such a big problem early on in the game. However, by the time you reach mid to end game and you're wanting to start colonizing planets which happen to be in sectors, just those additional little planets that are all over the place that maybe you didn't have time to colonize earlier, well, now you've got to micromanage them and build all of the robotic populations on them. And the sector AI does not help you out here, because it likes to move them around. You've got an energy specialist, a mining specialist, and a science specialist. And it wants to put the science specialist in the mine. It wants to put the mining drone in the science building. It wants to put the energy specialist on Unity instead of in energy production. And you're going, come on, don't do that. All of these are specialized robots. I shouldn't need to come back later and check to make sure that they're all doing their jobs properly. Thankfully, this is less of a problem on fully developed planets, as the AI will tend to rearrange them less often, but it will still rearrange them. Quite often you'll look up and go, why am I suddenly in energy crisis? I was fine like a second ago. You'll go through your sectors and find that your mining drones are now working the power plants for some reason. It's a really annoying problem. Of course, that is not the limit of things. There is, of course, the ability to create specific templates so that you can have specific robots for specific functions. I created a number of robots who are specialized for one thing, being leader pops. However, I cannot restrict them to leadership while restricting the other pops, which means that my admirals were often mining drones rather than the specific leader pops that I had created to recruit my admirals from. That's a pain in the butt. At some point I should be able to say, look, only these robots which I have built as admirals and generals are allowed to join the army. That way I can have my general bots instead of mining drones serving in my army. That's one thing. The second thing is the fact that you can't get rid of old templates, which discourages you from exploiting robot modding to its fullest, because you'll have to scroll through a long list of your various different types of robots, particularly the old ones which stay at the top, your newer robots going in at the bottom of the list. This is an absolute pain in the butt. I mean, I can understand it being one thing if those populations already continue to exist throughout the Empire, but I should at the very least be able to hide them. And half the time I'm upgrading my particular populations as I go in order to make sure that they are the most current models. There is also, on the subject of upgrading my pops, another problem, in that it can get very fiddly trying to upgrade specific populations early on. You don't start with robot modding. You need to tech up into it, which means that your early planets will have a lot of inefficient robots on them, and you might go, well, I specifically want to upgrade just those robots into different types. Fat chance, you have to upgrade them in blocks based on what type of species they are, which means that on the starting planet you might go, well, I want 5 mining drones, 2 science bots, and a bunch of power plant bots. And then you can't do that. You've got to go all science, all mining, or all power plant bots, because it doesn't allow you to modify the individual populations. The best that you can do is dismantle them and then replace them with something else, which is particularly slow and annoying, and it would be nice if we could just target a robot and have an upgrade button, and we click upgrade, and then we choose a new template and we change it into that particular type of robot. That's your robotic populations. They're great. The fact that they play differently from other races, that they feel distinct, that you need to make changes to your strategy, the way that you would normally play a game in order to play your robots, excellent. It's a step in the right direction. There are a number of annoying things about them which holds them back slightly, but it's still alright. So there's that. It just seems like, as with so many cases, Paradox has just thrown their ideas in at the first form. They haven't gone and refined these constantly over and over again to go, yes, okay, what potential problems could arise if we make it this system? Okay, how do we fix that? Let's refine this idea into its best possible form. They've gone with, someone's gone, what if we added robot races to the game? And they've gone, yes, and then they've just smacked in the first edition rather than any attempt at really polishing this thing up, and it's a shame. Last thing to talk about for the machine races will be new technologies, interactions, and ascension perks. Let's start with interactions. Throughout the game there are a number of interactions. You've probably noticed them. If you're a militarist, you'll get a dialogue option which you can choose from. With the machine empires, there are, it seems, two that I've encountered. Number one is with the Leviathan, the Technosphere. It is incredibly disappointing. In this case, if you are a machine race, the Technosphere will tell you to go away and it will simply end the event log and you can do nothing else with it. It is terrible because there is an event chain there for every other race, something for you to do with your content. And the fact that you pay for the Leviathan's DLC as well means that the Technosphere just saying like, hey, have a big old middle finger and go away. You're going, oh, really? Because this is like, you often only get 3 Leviathans in a game, and quite often you can't get access to all of them because the AI empires will get them first. So, thanks for that, I guess, Paradox. Well done. The second one to talk about are unique technologies. These are, for the most part, kind of disappointing in that, for many cases, they are recolored flavor texts. Now, throughout this expansion, all of the technology has been redone, if applicable, specifically to robots, to have different names. They do the exact same things that they have always done as technologies, but they have different names, all of them. And they have different flavor texts in a lot of places if you mouse over them while they're in the technology tree. However, there are specific unique texts that only machine races can get, and they are not particularly exciting. There is one, for example, which is the equivalent of the Galactic Stock Exchange. It's got its own unique art, it's got its own unique name and description, but it does the exact same thing. So it feels less unique and more like, look, you just get your own flavor of this technology. It looks slightly different, but that's it. It does the exact same thing as everyone else's version. So that's disappointing. And you get things like mega war forms, which are just bigger, better armies, but simultaneously you don't get access to a lot of the army add-ons that other races get. So again, it feels disappointing. Also the fact that armies are terrible and lackluster feature in the game. So getting your own unique robotic army types does not feel great. It's like, oh, I got unique army types? They work exactly the same as every other army in the game? Okay, they don't feel any different, but nice, I suppose. Good that they have their own names and stuff. Cool. And the last one is, of course, Machine Worlds. This is your Ascension perk for robots. It allows you to terraform a planet into a machine world. Machine worlds cannot house organic species. They are for machines only. Cyborgs count as organic species in this case and can't live there, which is somewhat disappointing. The notable thing, of course, that machine worlds do is they increase the productivity of machine populations working there, so you can get a nice resource boost out of them. But they also take a lot of resources to do, so you're only going to have a handful of them. Feels kind of underwhelming. There's also the fact that they look hideous, and the fact that their tile set is like, it hurts your eyes to look at, and it also makes it hard to distinguish what is actually on the background. It's terrible. I don't know why the art department didn't go look at that and just say, oh man, that's really ugly. Why don't we make a better version? No? No? Okay, you're leaving it as it is. Cool. Other than that, they don't look great. I mean, there's some machine style circles on your planet, so yeah. it's not, it's all right, but it's not great. And I quite often, by the time I have access to machine worlds as a option for my empire, I'll choose Galactic Force, or I'll choose Defender of the Galaxy instead, because they seem to be more useful. I haven't had enough chance to experiment with them, so maybe I'm wrong. That's just the initial feeling. They don't feel like they're worth investing in. But if you had a lot of them, I can see them giving you a significant boost to your productivity. So this video would not be complete without some mention of the new endgame crisis, the contingency. It is an endgame crisis. What else can I say about it? It's spawned a lot of ships, and that's it. It's disappointing, but at the same time, this is still the only way in which they can increase difficulty until they overhaul the war system. Something which I still think is desperately needed, because the game is very boring. Have you got enough ships for the contingency? Yes, congratulations, you've already won. If you don't have enough ships, you've already lost. Awesome. Cool. Great strategy game. There are some nice steps in the right direction here, I will admit. The fact that your scientists are involved at several points along the way. If you're a machine race, when the contingency spawns, you take a massive hit to both your fleet, if you've got sentient combat computers, and your economy. It's absolutely huge, and you need your scientists to research a project in order to get rid of it. That's nice. It is nice to see that there is an involvement beyond just having a big fleet. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it just doesn't go far enough. But it's a step in the right direction, I'll say that. It is about what I expected it to be, honestly. In summary, is Synthetic Dawn worth buying? The answer is yes, but not right now. What is here is a definite step in the right direction, and it's something that is definitely worth playing, but it's not worth spending the extra money on just yet. For what you actually get for your money, wait for a sale, because you're going to want this, but you probably don't want it at what it's worth right now. Like, if it were just ever so slightly cheaper, you wouldn't feel like you're being ripped off. As it is, having played all of those 3 machine races, I am now ready to put Stellaris back on the shelf, because I'm done with it again. I've beaten the contingency a couple of times now, and I've got my strategy down pat. It's basically build a big fleet again, and I can build a big fleet. I'm gonna have to wait until we end up with something where there is strategy involved, where each game feels different, because still, now, each game feels the same. But with this new DLC, it does feel like Paradox is steering the ship in the right direction. I just wish they'd hurry up and get somewhere where I can invest thousands of hours into this game, rather than playing it a couple of times each time an expansion comes out and then putting it away. Not quite there yet, but I have my hopes that eventually it will be.